Peace, family. It's your brother, Marc Lamont Hill. Welcome to the Marc Lamont Hill official YouTube channel and the War on Gaza Report. Every single day here on the channel, I talk about what's going on in Gaza. I talk about Israel's war on Gaza, not in Gaza, but on Gaza. And I talk about what we can do to end it. But today, in particular, we're going to talk about Vice President Kamala Harris. As you know, Vice President Harris has chosen Minnesota Governor Tim Walz as her running mate. And this is a big deal. It's a big deal because it's always a big deal when presidential candidates make their choice, but it's a big deal for another reason. You know, the Biden administration has struggled mightily in the last year regarding Israel-Palestine, and the Biden campaign suffered really fatal blows because of its failure to respond to the war on Gaza in a responsible or reasonable way. To put it simply, there's a whole lot of people who were not happy with how Biden was engaging or responding to Israel-Palestine, and specifically what's been happening in Gaza since October 7th. And so lots of protesters said, we're not voting for Biden. Lots of protesters said he's underwriting the genocide. We're not supporting. Lots of people said, very simply, we do not believe that Biden is doing enough to stop this thing. Young people, college students, Arabs, Muslims, you know, all kinds of brown folks said, we're not doing this. In places like Michigan and Pennsylvania, there was a movement to remain uncommitted. They said, we're not saying we're going to vote Trump. We're not saying we're not going to vote, but we are saying we're not going to commit to voting for you, Mr. Biden, until you make a definitive move on Gaza, specifically calling for and demanding a ceasefire, specifically maybe an arms embargo, something substantive to demonstrate the distance between you and Netanyahu. Ultimately, the Biden campaign faltered, not because of Israel-Palestine only, although that certainly didn't help his approval ratings among progressives, but it also faltered because of his poor debate performances, perceptions that he was not mentally sound. All the other things happened. Enter Kamala Harris. For a few weeks now, Vice President Kamala Harris has been at the top of the ticket, the presumptive nominee for the Democratic Party, and who she chooses mattered. Within a week or two, she'd gotten hundreds of millions of dollars, the majority of which, 66%, I believe at the time, came from people who had not donated before she got to the top of the ticket. In other words, people didn't want to give Biden money, but they were willing to give Harris money. That included young people. That included college students. That included Black and brown people. And so lots of people were looking to Kamala Harris to figure out if she was different than Biden. People certainly hoped that she would be different than Biden. They started pulling at things to figure out, particularly on the issue of Israel-Palestine, if she is different. They looked to the fact that she didn't attend the joint session of Congress when Netanyahu appeared to grandstand and lie. And they said, maybe that's a sign. They looked back to, 6 months ago when she called for a ceasefire and was the first person and said, maybe that's a sign. And so people have been looking for signs that Kamala Harris is more progressive on the issue of Palestine than Joe Biden. Other people quite reasonably have said, nope. New driver, same direction. Kamala Harris has been talking to AIPAC for years and echoed their talking points for years. She's talked about Israel's right to defend itself in ways that reinforce the logic of settler colonial violence and that sustain Israeli apartheid. That there's no that she's chastised the protesters in the same way. So this is the conversation, and I've certainly said all those things. I'm not trying to sort of act as if like I'm just speaking hypothetically. I've said those things too. So the question becomes, ultimately, is Tim Walz, and Kamala Harris for that matter, better for Palestine, better on Palestine than the alternative or alternatives? And that's what I want to talk about right now before we go. And I know some of you like, look, I need the Tim Walz 101 before we get to foreign policy. I need the Tim Walz 101. I'm going to give you all that tonight on Night School. Make sure you watch Night School tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern. Right here on the channel, we will break down everything Tim Walz, his domestic policy positions, his background, his history. I'll give you a full analysis of who Tim Walz is and why he was chosen. But for now, I'm just going to focus on this issue of Israel-Palestine because this is the Israel's war on Gaza report. The first thing I would tell you is the selection of Walz has to be understood against the backdrop of Shapiro, because the two finalists were Josh Shapiro, governor of Pennsylvania, and Tim Walz, governor of Minnesota. These were the options. Now, some of y'all are going to say, well, does it matter who the choice is? Some ways yes, some ways no. Ultimately, the policy agenda is going to be set by the president. Doesn't matter who you pick. We have to be honest about that. So if you don't like Kamala Harris's policy positions, if you don't agree with Kamala Harris's policy positions, getting a different VP probably won't change that much. But the VP choice does signal something. It signals to the voters what you value. It signals to the voters that what you care about, and it signals to voters what directions you might be leaning toward in terms of policy. I'll give you a concrete example. 4 years ago, Joe Biden said, I am looking to choose a Black woman to be VP and to be on the Supreme Court. That was Joe Biden saying not that only Black women were qualified, but that Black women are qualified. And frankly, Black women got him elected. He knows that he would not be president if not for Black women, particularly Black Southern women. And so Joe Biden made a decision to reward his base, but also to say, I see my base and I value the interests of my base. We can have a whole conversation and debate, if you want, about whether Joe Biden actually honored that promise. I would say to a large extent, no. Some ways, yes, but in a lot of ways, no. Joe Biden did not fulfill the promises. But the gesture itself is a signal that there's at least an attempt to move in a direction. And when he chose Kamala Harris, people thought that had value and meaning. And so I don't want to now suggest that there is no value and meaning in who she selects as VP. That's the first part. Second part is, yes. Second part is Josh Shapiro different? Is Tim Walz different? Are any of these people different? Let's say first, in the most fundamental ways, no. You cannot be an American president or vice president if you do not bow before the altar of American imperialism. You're not going to be on a ticket. You're not going to get voted in. You're not going to get nominated. You might get a congressional seat, maybe for a term or two in the House. Definitely not in the Senate, but in general, you're not going to get on the ticket in this way. We see what happened with Jamal Bowman. We see what happened with Cori Bush. We watch them getting primaried because AIPAC is willing to dump tens of millions of dollars in to fight them. I'm not saying we can't beat AIPAC. We beat AIPAC all the time on issues, on deals. We mount a principled defense and we win. I'm not suggesting that that's not the case. What I am suggesting, though, is that if you're looking for a U.S. president that is going to not be imperialist or not advance an imperialist agenda, you're probably not being realistic. No, you are not being realistic. If you're looking for a U.S. president that will say that Israel is a settler colonial ethno state that should be fundamentally dismantled and rebuilt as a secular democracy, it ain't going to happen. So for me, the question isn't what U.S. president will stop the genocide or what U.S. president will free Palestine. Ain't no U.S. president going to free Palestine. But the question is, what, to use the language of James Baldwin back when he was talking about, the Reagan Carter contest in 1980, who gives us a means of buying time? What is the least harmful choice that allows us to do the best work to struggle for freedom another day? That's the question. And I'm not saying that there's a clear answer all the time to that question, but that has to be how I think about this, right? I don't think what president is going to get us free. I think what president will do the least harm or create enough space for us to at least allow less harm to happen to people. So for me, when I look at Josh Shapiro, who was the other finalist as opposed to Tim Walz, I say Shapiro would do more harm. There's a lot of other reasons that Shapiro would do harm. Shapiro supports school vouchers, really dismantling public education. He's he supports fracking. He supports, let me say, he's on the wrong side of fracking. He's on the wrong side of environmental or climate issues often. He's on the wrong side of free speech in terms of, BDS and things like that. There's a lot of reasons why Shapiro would not be a good ideological choice, but he's also wasn't a good tactical choice. Because when people saw Josh Shapiro, they saw a shrinkage in their ability to protest, a shrinkage in their ability to resist. And so young people weren't going to vote as much. Moderates weren't going to vote. You might win Pennsylvania, although I think that's overstated, but you might lose Michigan. And so if this is all the case, then you have to ask yourself, what's the practical consequence of Josh Shapiro being VP? Practical consequence is it's more likely that Donald Trump becomes president. Then you have to ask yourself, is Donald Trump being president worse for Gaza or Palestine than, say, Biden? I would argue yes, and I don't think it's a close call. I think Trump is much worse on Palestine than Biden is. And that's not because Biden is good on it. Biden is trash on it. And so was Obama, and so was Clinton, and so was Bush, and so was his daddy Bush, although his daddy Bush spoke out against settlements at least. They're all trash on Palestine. But under Trump, they created a whole, they named a settlement after him because he was willing to recognize the illegal annexation of part of the Golan Line. Trump agreed to cut UNRWA not for a moment, but permanently as a matter of policy. Trump and Netanyahu were besties. There is a reason why Netanyahu prefers Trump to be president than somebody else. It tells you something. Well, let's keep going. So Josh Shapiro has attempted to silence, or at least police, silence is overstating, at least police the language and the behaviors and the way that people protested inside the state, government employees. But also as Attorney General, he was pushing back against BDS. So the Ben and Jerry's protest, for example, trying to punish Ben and Jerry's. So this is the context of saying no Josh Shapiro. It's not because he's Jewish. It's not because it's personal. It's because Josh Shapiro is simply concretely and materially worse. But we don't want to confuse Josh Shapiro being worse with Walz being good on this issue. Walz is not good on this issue any more than Kamala is good on this issue. They're all bad on this issue. So let's be very clear about that. They're all bad on this issue. Here's the difference to me. Kamala Harris has shown movement on the matter. Walz has shown on other issues like gun control, for example, that he can be moved on the issue. So I would like someone who can be moved on the issue rather than someone who can't be moved on the issue. Under Obama, as bad as Obama was, he at least was willing to abstain from a vote that allowed Israel to be challenged and reprimanded, not just reprimanded, but censured. There's another word that I'm trying to think of for illegal settlement expansion. So while Trump shielded Israel from it, Obama moved out the way. It was not a profile in courage. Obama was cowardly on the issue. He should have voted with the international community. But even his abstention did something. Biden has shielded Israel from criticism in the international community, in the diplomatic community, on the UN Security Council. He's damn near criticized the ICJ. You know, he did criticize the ICJ, and this is the context. So Biden has not proven himself to be reliable or valuable on this issue. Now, you might say, well, Harris is part of the same administration. VPs often have different politics on this. Obama was bad. Biden was way worse. Biden was Obama's VP, but when he became president, he had a much worse policy position. Now we're looking at Harris. She could have a better policy position, not a good one. I got to say that again. Choosing Harris or choosing Walz is not going to free Palestine. But what I can tell you is choosing Trump, either directly or by saying we're going to vote third party, does have a material impact on a variety of policy issues, that Supreme Court, reproductive rights, etc. And it specifically will have one on Palestine. So there are multiple tactics you can take. Some people are going to take the third party route and say, look, we are going to make the Democrats feel our pain. We are going to make Democrats say, until we move to the left, we can't win an election because the left wing of our movement is not going to vote with us. They're not going to reward us for genocide. That's one position. I've taken that position in the past in multiple elections, most elections, to be honest. There's another position, which is the one I took in the last election cycle, and then I'm inclined to take this election cycle, which is that I want to do harm reduction. I want to mitigate the harm that can happen. Again, not romanticizing who Harris or Walz are. They are liberals, moderates. They're not radicals. They're not super progressives. They are liberals. But by choosing them, we're more likely to see a ceasefire. By choosing them, we're more likely to see at least some restraint when it comes to weapons provision. I'm not talking about weapons overall. There's at least an opportunity for the international community to intervene. I don't buy all of Biden's press leaks about how he's cussing Netanyahu out, but there is a significant frustration from what I've heard from the State Department, people who worked in the State Department and some who continue to work in the State Department, that Biden is at least pushing back on Netanyahu, and he's becoming increasingly frustrated with him for not closing the deal, because, surprise, Netanyahu doesn't want to close the deal. Netanyahu doesn't want peace. Netanyahu wants a doctrine of permanent war that keeps him in power and ultimately leads to the genocide of the Palestinian people. So what can save lives? What can keep people at arm's length? What can stop people from dying? That's the question I ask myself. So you say, so when the question becomes, as I posed here, what does the choice of Tim Walz mean for Palestine? I started by saying what it doesn't mean. It doesn't mean a free Palestine. It doesn't mean an end to this. It doesn't mean, the end to genocide. But what it does mean is an opportunity to push back, an opportunity to struggle for another day, an opportunity to fight for another day. So for me, I'm not out here all Semper Fi for Harris Walz, but I do believe that if we're talking about harm reduction, if we're talking about at least creating the space for the protest, they're in front of Walz's house right now, literally in Minnesota, protesting, and Walz's response was very different than Shapiro's. Shapiro's was one of repression, one of dismissiveness. The response from Walz was people have a reason to be speaking out. They have a principled critique. Let's not romanticize that, because I don't need you to say I love your little protest and continue to fund an imperial war. I need the imperial war to stop. I need the U.S. to make it stop. There are people right now who are saying no ceasefire, no vote. I have absolutely no opposition to that position if that's the position you take. That is a principled position. It is a principled position to say, I'm not voting for anyone who supports a genocide. That is a principled position. I'm not here to talk you out of that position. I don't think that you are wrong for taking that position. But my position is that the best way to stop the bleeding, the best way to stop this imperial war, the best way to stop the genocide is by stopping Trump from getting into office. Trump is worse. Trump is demonstrably and qualitatively and quantitatively worse. And so for me, the top priority is stopping Trump. And so for that reason, I will be doing whatever I can to ensure that Trump is not reelected. In the past, that hasn't always been my focus for a variety of reasons. And I think we're principled. No, they absolutely were principled and sincere. I'm taking a different strategy because, and talking to, and I hope you all check out my interview with the Working Families Party, because that is part of my calculus too. And people are saying Project 2025. Of course, that's the point, right? Is that if every president is going to be trash on Gaza, do I just want to surrender to the Supreme Court? Do I just want to surrender to Project 2025? Do I just want to surrender any of these things? They're all corporate candidates. They're all neoliberal candidates. They're all bought and paid for it. I'm talking about the ones that can win. They're all trash at a certain level, right? That's not about individuals. That's about the system. But we can vote in ways that stop women from losing reproductive rights. We can vote in ways that allow abortion to exist. We can vote in ways that will not make the Supreme Court 6-3 or 8-1 for the next 100 years. I mean, there are things that we can do. I think ultimately social transformation is going to happen in the ballot box. We're not going to transform the world by voting, but voting is a tactic. It's not the strategy, it's a tactic. And the question is, what is the tactic that will get us where we want to be? What's more likely to get me as a Black person reparations in America? What's more likely for me to get high quality schools here in America? What is more likely, right? And abroad, what is more likely to stop these imperial invasions? What's more likely? So that's why I'm making the choice. So Tim Walz is a big deal. His selection matters a lot more for who we don't get both Josh Shapiro as VP and Trump as president, then maybe what we are going to get. But that's what it means to be pragmatic. That's what it means to make a choice and a tactical strategy that isn't idealistic or ideal, but that gets us closer to freedom, or at least lets us live another day to fight for that freedom. So anyway, that's my analysis of Kamala Harris, Tim Walz, and Palestine. We'll say more tonight. Tonight, I will be sitting down with a representative of American Muslims for Palestine in Minnesota. She will be breaking down fully. She will be fully breaking. Her name is Sanaa Wazwaz, and Sanaa Wazwaz is the chapter lead and education coordinator for American Muslims for Palestine. She will break down from a Palestinian perspective, because I ain't Palestinian, from a Palestinian perspective, what his selection means. She's been challenging and testing and fighting and pushing back against Walz for years now, I guess 5 years now. So we'll get her perspective. We'll be breaking down Walz's background. We'll be breaking down his domestic policy agenda. We'll be breaking down what the VP means and what the likelihood is that his selection or non-selection would mean for the outcome of this election. We're going to break it all down. We're going to talk about all of it at 9 o'clock tonight, right here on the channel. So again, please, if you can, check me out 9 p.m. Eastern right here. In the meantime, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and if you're so inclined, hit that join button and become a monthly subscriber to the channel. I got a, before I go, I saw this here. It says, POTUS barely makes the call on Palestine and Israel. VP choices for optics and votes. Dems and GOP will continue to slaughter. Let's stay clear on this. I don't disagree, Mikey. Ultimately, the VP choice in many ways is about optics and votes, but it's signaling to the public what your priorities are. If you choose Josh Shapiro, that is saying, I'm not listening to moderates. I'm not listening to progressives. I'm not listening to youth. That matters too. But I think you're right to keep us sort of with pristine clarity in our analysis. No U.S. president is going to free Palestine. No U.S. president is not going to be ultimately managing American empire. And we can't be dishonest about that ever. So the question is, what's the best option for us? And once again, yep, Rosability, I will be on tonight, 9 p.m. Again, 9 p.m. We'll be talking to Sanaa Wazwaz, who is the chapter lead for American Muslims for Palestine. We'll be talking about the election, but we're talking about more than the election. We're talking about a range of issues going on in America right now. But make sure you check us out tonight. In the meantime, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the join button. And also, if you want to support independent grassroots media, black media, radical media, whatever you want to call it, I ask that you support us right here by hitting the join button and becoming a monthly contributor to the channel, or go to Cash App, PayPal, Venmo, and Zelle. Send us whatever you want. If you send $1, we're happy. If you send $1 million, we're happy. Whatever you send to support it, nothing is too little, because it all comes from the people, and the people is what powers this media. So thank you for watching, and I will see you tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern. Peace.